Welcome very much to our IIP talk on the What Future for Albania, reflections on the election results. I look forward to an interactive discussion, I would say, like more than a talk, where our guests, and I would like to present right now, GENTIOLA MADHI. It's a pleasure to see you. It's a pleasure to see you, even though it's only on the screen. Welcome. GENTIOLA is an associated researcher at the European Movement Albania, and she's also a contributor to Osservatiorio, Balcani, Caucaso, a Transeuropa, which is a think tank based in Italy. But also, she's also part of our group Young Generation for the Western Balkans, and she used to travel with us when it was still possible and when we could have been discussing even in person. I would also like to welcome Hannes SWOBODA, who is president of the IIP and former MEP, and he knows the region very well. And I'm very happy also that he accepted also to talk together with me. I'm Stephanie FENKART. I'm going to moderate to talk with me and with GENTIOLA about what happened in Albania, what is the future, what are the outlooks, and what are the challenges. As probably most of you know, there were elections on Sunday in Albania. And it seems that Rama, who is the prime minister in Albania since 2013, won again. So out of the 140 members for the new parliament, it seems that he got like 74 seats, and which leaves him a little bit before the opposition. We also know, though, that before the elections, there was quite a depolarization when it comes to the main parties competing for the elections. There was even a casualty, I hear. A person was shot last week in Tirana. And also I hear that the atmosphere was quite tense. My question would be first to GENTIOLA. If you can reflect a little bit about the election results. What does it mean? What will be the outcome? Who will be governing for the next years? But also maybe how was the atmosphere before the election? And just what is your assessment on the election from Sunday, from your point of view right now? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to meet again, also this time differently from in person that we did until last year. So yeah, we had the elections on the 25th of April. There were a bit of polarization, a polarized situation, and quite worrisome at a certain extent. But fortunately, the situation, at least the day of elections, went well, and I would say that overall the voter turnout at the polls was around 46%, which is quite good. The expectations were that the participation would be much more lower because obviously COVID and the protests of last year and the general disappointment and disillusionment, especially among the youngsters, would have brought to a lower participation in the elections. But luckily, the citizens realized that going and participating in the election is important, not just for the day or the act itself as a civic duty, but also for the future of the next 4 years, and also the enlargement process itself, which is the major objective of all the political parties in Albania, but also the citizens. I would say that there are some elements that are important to mention. Starting from the participation at the elections. The first one is that the data published on the media, but also in the Central Electoral Commission, say that the male participation was higher than the female, 52%, which shows that politics remains still a male-dominated. Also, the participation of the candidates in the list, the potential MPs, was 60% male and only 40% women, so females, which is still lagging behind our objective of having an equilibrium among the genders. So the political parties that participate in the elections were 10, and there were 2 competing coalitions, but also we had 5 independent candidates, out of whom 3 are aligned with the Self-Determination or Vetëvendosje party, the sister party that is running in Kosovo, but also is leading the Kosovo government. The Socialists, yeah, they got 74 seats in the new parliament, which the number remains invariated with respect to 2017. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party, the right wing, they got 59 seats, which is a positive step because they got previously in 2017, they had 43. So it is a good move for them, but still it is important to mention that it is the first time that since the end of the communism, a political party in Albania gets the third mandate to govern the country. It had never happened before. So generally there were 2 mandates, and then the opposite party was coming to power. There was this 8 years of governing, which led also to shifting from one party to another, bringing new possibilities, but new perspectives. The big loser is considered among the parties the Socialist Movement for Integration, which is the center left. And is headed currently by the wife of the president, Ilir Meta, and they lost 15 MPs, meaning that now they will have 4. Meanwhile, in 2017, they had 19, which means quite a considerable loss. Meanwhile, the last one in terms of numbers is the Socialist Democratic Party, which has done rather good, I'd say. They passed from 1 MP to 3 MPs. This party is led by a politician which has been openly alleged for corruption, corruptive affairs, and also the US Embassy asked openly, publicly, not to participate in the elections for the leader, Tom Doshi. And in fact, he participated and he decided the day after the elections to withdraw once he understood that his party got 3 mandates instead of 1, as 4 years ago. But it is known that this party will create an alliance with the Socialists. So 74 plus 3 is going to be 77 for the governing the new government in Albania, which will start the mandate in September. The elections were held a bit previously than in general because it was decided that summer is not the appropriate time to have elections because also the touristic income influx and also the diaspora coming back home. So it was good to have the elections in April, but still to continue with the new government establishment in September. So this year are basically the major data. Then we can discuss afterwards on how the elections went and which are the main sensitive areas that the monitoring missions identified.
Maybe just to ask one more question, since there is a very big diaspora of Albanians, how was it possible, because this was also an issue, that it should also be possible to participate in the elections? Like, how did it turn out in the end with the diaspora?
Yeah, unfortunately, there were too many promises. I would say that the Socialists had always promised since in 2013 that once they were going to come to power, they would have allowed voting for the diaspora in distance. But unfortunately, even this time, so the third mandate in a row, third elections in a row, this was not possible. Obviously, it is to mention that the technical committee dealing with the management of the COVID crisis at the moment decided that the diaspora or the Albanians living in North Macedonia, but also living in Greece, couldn't travel or were not allowed to travel to Albania and participate in the elections. Obviously, this was not put in these terms. It was said that if you want to travel a week before the elections to Albania, then you have to stay 2 weeks at home for the quarantine, which makes it impossible for them to go and vote. And the same thing is valid basically also for the other countries. Personally, I didn't participate because even though Albania didn't have the quarantine for the residents in Italy, but it was the Italian government that had put this rules, which didn't allow at the end of the day the participation of a great number of Albanian voters staying. And so some calculations that were circulating in the media told that at the end of the day, the Socialist Party that got the majority of the votes has been voted just by 21%, more or less, of the people having the right to vote, which means that it's not the will, or they don't represent the will of the majority of the Albanian voters, but just 21%, the ones living basically in the country.
Thank you for the clarification. I think that's quite remarkable still, and One more question before we probably then proceed also to Hannes would be, like, what would you say, like now in this third term, what is the biggest challenge? What are the biggest challenges, but also probably opportunities for the third Edi Rama government in Albania?
Well, the biggest challenge that I think that it's not just in Albania, basically it's all in the world, but also EU and Europe in general, where we stand, is the economic situation. So we have the effects of COVID on the economic development have been quite sensitive. And the second, I would mention just an example here, the public debt has grown up really significantly during last year, but also in the last month. The last data of the first trimester of 2021 say that it boosted up with 41% of the entire year of 2020, which means that we can have a public debt that might become really unsustainable for the Albanian economy. Then after COVID, there is the reconstruction because of the earthquake. We have to admit that the situation is not good. There are lots of families that are still living in not appropriate conditions and having lost everything, not just jobs, but also their apartments and all businesses and so on and so forth. The third point I would mention here is the investment in healthcare, because we effectively need both infrastructure, health infrastructure, but also investment in medical staff. We have to admit that a considerable number of doctors, nurses, and so on have left Albania for better conditions and better employment and payments to Germany in the past years. And this makes our system really fragile. And I also mention education. Not always has been mentioned, or at least it's not put on the top 5 priority of the governments in general. It ranks around 7th or so on, but without investing in proper education and conditions and infrastructure, and not just internet, but also other means and tools, since the first elementary, we cannot expect to have better generations that invest to live in their own countries, and we will continue to have decline both in demographic terms, but also a decline in terms of democracy, because the less citizens are educated, the less they are aware of their own rights, and they can demand for accountability and transparency on behalf of the leaders that are governing them.
Thank you, Gentiola. I think we will still then come back also a little bit still to domestic issues, but also then more a little bit to the region and of course the European Union perspective. But maybe before we go there, Hannes, I would like to ask you, since I know that you traveled very often to Albania. I know you met with Edi Rama earlier, since he's the prime minister since 2013, but he's in the government already since I think 98 or something, or even before 93 or 4. I'm not really sure about that. But how would you assess now that he won again in Albania, and what do you think that this means domestically, but maybe also a little bit regionally when it comes to the Socialist Party in Albania?
Well, the real question is who is the big winner? Because Gentiola, as I said, on the one hand, you have Edi Rama and his party gaining again a majority to govern alone. On the other hand, you have the Democratic Party who has been strengthened. So does that mean a new fight, more of equals, because the Democratic Party has been growing? Or is it perhaps helping to overcome this kind of antagonism between the two, the Democratic parties and the Socialists? Because even the Democrats, and especially the relatively young leader who always has been in the shadow of the former leader, Salih Berisha, has now more, let's say, possibility to put his own ideas on the table. So this would be also a bit of a question to Gentiola, how she sees this balance between the two powers. And Stephanie, because you mentioned Edi Rama especially, yes, I know him quite well since the time when he was mayor, not in the last years. He's a very strong man. You could also say, and some people will say, he's authoritarian. What does it mean now for the position of Edi Rama? Does it mean that he's now more comfortable, more easygoing, or does it mean he has now, in his opinion, got strengths and will go into even stronger, let's say, authoritarian way of governing? it was interesting, at least in one of the tweets I saw, that he mentioned the first one who congratulated him was the Turkish president, to whom he has a good relationship, former times a bit more critically, I think now less critically. So the question is, maybe also to GENTIOLA, is Erdogan in some way, not copying him, but in some way a leader where Edi Rama thinks, oh, that's somebody who really has strengths and who has the willingness and the possibility to implement his ideas. So I think these are two very important questions before coming to the region, which is another issue, because then we have to take up the activities of Albin Kurti and the voting of Albin Kurti, and the leader from Kosovo in Albania. But I think the basic element is, does it lead to more authoritarianism in Albania now, this new relationship, or to a more balanced system of a two-party system, changing from time to time, because probably, never know, but probably this will be the last term of Edi Rama. It would be a real miracle if he would win another election. So maybe, GENTIOLA, you could also comment on these issues, if Stephanie allows.
I do so. I pass on directly to GENTIOLA.
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure. Actually, in my point of view, these elections initially, or in the past months, were seen as, the opportunity to have a breakthrough and to have new alternatives, new people showing up in the parliament, giving an end also to these 2 years where the parliament was paralyzed and under the responsibility and in the hands of the Socialist Party, because obviously the opposition decided to relinquish its mandate. But at the end of the day, I don't want to be pessimistic, but it's not that we got any real new alternative coming out of these elections. We found Rama that got a considerable consent during the elections. On the other side, obviously the opposition performed well, but the opposition, at least the Democratic Party today, is really more fragile and more fragmented than before. Having heard in the past days the voices against the leader Basha, and asking him basically within the party to step out and leave the opportunity to a new leader to be elected in the coming months, in order to bring together all the members or activists of the Democratic Party that emerged during the 90s, but also the new members, in order to have a unified opposition coming up with a real program for the next elections. On the other hand, we have also the leader Basha that doesn't look like being intentionated or aiming to leave the leadership of the Democratic Party. So there is quite a sensitive issue on them, and it is important to see how they will develop, because on their restructuring depends also the functionality of the parliament itself. If we don't have an opposition, then obviously Rama has all the power to continue as he thinks it's better. On the other side, the party of the president, the SMI, admitted that it was a wrong move on their behalf to leave the parliament 2 years ago. At least this is quite important, that they understood that they, being an MP or being a member of the parliament and in a political group, brings responsibility, and you should not act on just at the moment with this strong hot blood, but think it more pragmatically and bring up the voice of the citizens that voted you. Obviously, Rama, during the campaign, the electoral campaign, mentioned several times that we need the third mandate to finish what we have promised. And the promise was economic development, the famous 300,000 new employment places, jobs, which has been quite promoted since 2013 and yet not created this amount of 300,000 places of work. And if Rama doesn't manage to make a change during this new term, then obviously it's sure that he will not manage to go ahead, and probably he will have also to leave the leadership of the party to others. But on the other side, I would say that it was not just a matter of political leadership, the situation in Albania. It's a concerted action. It's not just the leader, but also the ministers that are responsible for specific portfolios. We are seeing and witnessing that the reform, the judicial reform, and the new institutions coming up. But on the other side, we see also sensitive internal issues like organized crime and drug trafficking and corruption that bring to this phenomenon to flourish, that are not performing as well as they did during the first mandate. It looks like the politicians are being a bit tired, or the possibility to have all this power, not having an opposition in the parliament, has allowed them to not do their homework on time, but to postpone the achievement of the objectives. And so in this regard, the more strong monitoring and also push from international actors is important, for as long as internally we cannot manage to keep all the politicians accountable and ask them to perform better than they have done so far. Meanwhile, on Turkey, I say that it was expected that Erdogan was going to be the first leader to wish Rama for his new term. I say this because obviously Erdogan participated indirectly in the political campaign for as long as he promised the construction of a hospital in Fier, which is quite important in the center-south city, but also is known for being a bastion for the socialists. So bringing there a regional hospital was quite sensitive and needed in that moment. So it was a hospital for free, which was inaugurated a couple of days before the elections. And it's also similar to, if I would say, some years ago, if it was 2013, or I might be wrong on the exact year, in Kosovo, Erdogan participated during the elections. I remember elections in Kosovo together in a political rally together with Thaçi. So his participation brought to Thaçi's party at those old days some more new votes, also from the Turkish community in Kosovo. So yeah, obviously, yeah, and obviously the relations with Erdogan are problematic from one point of view. Are problematic because we are seeing this blurring line between what is interstate relations, what is relations, official relations between Albania and Turkey over the years with the ministers and on the general foreign policy, and what is personal relations between our two leaders. Now we see more and more on the media, but also on the social media of the leaders, their own relations, their closed door meetings, and the outcome. We are going to create Air Albania, a flying national flying company, air carrier, how it is called. But how did the procedure develop? Do we have a specific tracking record, administrative one, according to the national procedures, the governing procedures? Can we have access to see how this project developed? Which were the pros and cons? If there was a feasibility study or others? No, for now we don't have it. If personally, I did a small research visiting the website of the Prime Minister during last year, and I didn't find much about the meetings apart from the general description, sometimes yes and sometimes no, that they met, they discussed the usual sentences, and either they decided something, or they decided to continue meeting in 2 months' time, which is not quite acceptable in general in a democratic form of government, I mean. So yeah, this remains important. But on the other side, we have, in this specific moment, we have also to recognize that Turkey has helped Albania, either in the moment when we had the earthquake, that it was Turkish civil protection and also Italian ones that immediately participated and in a fair fast to the situation on the ground in Durrës, but also now with the selling and buying and for providing the jabs, the vaccine against the virus. Obviously, Albania remains an EU-oriented country, and the citizens, all the citizens want this pro-Western orientation to be the dominant one in more than 90%, and no leader can dare, in my opinion, to say that our perspective is not a Western-oriented one. But in a way or in another, they try to mix up this problematic relations or personal relations, or to sell them as friendly relations among our nations, with complying that we do have some backdoor exchanges, with the good provision of help that is coming from Turkey, but also I'm not well informed or deeply informed, but even with the UAE, the Emirates, even they got some important investment in the part of Durrës during December, and the law was passed in the parliament. And yet we haven't seen much of the research that is backing this decision to give part of the port of Durrës to the Arabs to do some investments there, considering that the port of Durrës is quite important, the first one for the nation, but considering for the country, but considering also that Albania is in NATO, so the port of Durrës is even an access to the wider Mediterranean Sea. So there are different multifaceted point of views on that. And on the other side, I think that Rama, at least in the past years, had been quite ambivalent in his approach to Erdogan. Saying this because obviously there had been some exchanges of interests or concessions, but on the other side, we haven't been in the same situation as Kosovo to send back people alleged supporters of the Gulen movement. Apart one specific case, the others at least are still in, or are presumed to be still in Albania, which is quite important because obviously internal affairs or questions of Turkey shouldn't be exported, and we cannot accept to have them exported in our country.
Thank you, thank you very much, Gentiola. Very interesting analysis, I would say. You mentioned that Erdogan had his share, at least in some ways, in these elections, but both of you already mentioned also, at least with Vindosya, I mean, they had 3 candidates as far as I know, but not even that. I mean, it's Albin Kurti who won the elections in Kosovo in February. He actually personally came there to vote himself. So this is what happened. So my question would be, how do you assess this? And there is one question in the chat also referring to that, where Clarice Pastari actually asked, how likely is it that Albin Kurti in the future will even run in the elections in Albania?
I followed those discussions on Twitter on the day of elections when Albin Kurti published the picture voting in Albania. It is actually from, let's say, from the perspective of the diaspora, Albanians living abroad, it's quite fair. We cannot restrict the rights, the fundamental rights protected by the constitution for people holding an Albanian passport to participate in the elections. Because if we restrict just for a temporary position that this person is holding, if we do it for one, there is a concession for one, then we have to apply it for everybody, and it becomes a precedent. And considering that personally I'm quite involved and sensitive on diaspora right to vote and to participate in the life of the country, not to be just a giver or provider of remittances, but to be also an active voice in the governance of the country, but also to be more involved in these general discussions in Albania, I would say that it was quite fair for him to participate. While the other side of the story is the participation of Albin Kurti, not just by voting and putting a picture on, but also he's visiting the cities where his candidates were running, even though they were registered as independent. Everybody knew that they were representing Vardosje, but the general electoral system in Albania was much more difficult to be managed by running through as a party, as a new party, than to run as a candidate. So in that regard, it created a fracture, because obviously the Prime Minister of Kosovo was running against the Prime Minister of Albania. And if we think that in principle they are all, both of them, I mean, are left-oriented, and their relation is known for not being good, certainly this act, this small gesture, doesn't help in the general relations between the two leaders. And we all know that the relationship, the personal relationship between Thaçi and Rama was quite strong. The way they met and the brotherhood that they showed in the media, but also in different settings, was going to have a certain consequence on the relation between Kurti and Rama. But to this extent, it is to be seen if Rama will visit Kosovo, because there is this unsaid, unwritten rule that as soon as the government establishes in either of the countries, the prime minister or the president visits. The first visit is paid to the other country. So theoretically, Albania and Rama should pay the first visit as the new prime minister for the third term to Kosovo. Obviously, there is time until September, and a lot of things can happen until now. But now the questions that have been put forward to Rama during an interview for a TV channel in Albania on Kurti, he decided not to speak about it. So he said that any questions that you are going to pose me on Kurti, I prefer not to answer. And he insisted on that, and we don't have an official position on that. The last issue on the Kurtis running in Albania, I don't have an answer. Actually, I have never thought about it. Kurti is quite welcomed in Albania in general. He's seen as a quite intellectual person, and the way how he speaks, he gets right to the people's heart. But on the other hand, we have also to accept or to recognize that one of the flagships of Kurti, the one putting Albania and Kosovo in a single country, reunited together, is not quite as felt as it is in Kosovo, or at least the younger generation in Albania don't see it in a perspective that Kurti sees it. And all the citizens in Kosovo, or even in the northern part of Albania, that Caucaso or so, that had the first influx of people from Kosovo during the war. So they lived the war, they know what it means, and they are more propense also to back Kurti in this regard. Meanwhile, the southern people, the ones that are younger generation, less than 30, and so on and so forth, their position is a bit much more, let's say, pragmatic or not well structured. So yeah, it has to be seen. Obviously, support of Kurti in Kosovo is so strong that I don't expect him to get the same level of support in Albania, at least at the moment, but things might change over time.
But just to briefly come in, because of this relationship, and even Edi Rama sometimes ago said if the Kosovo solution is not achieved, then we may think about a great Albania again. And you have, perhaps you have noticed also there was a so-called non-paper from Slovenia, which also spoke about dividing Bosnia-Herzegovina, but also about the great Albania. So even if I agree with you that it is not something which will come, at least not in the next years, do you think it may come as a disturbance, as some sort of a discussion which is leading away from stabilizing both countries separately? Is there some movement in it, or is it just a media issue?
Well, I have to admit that all political parties in Albania, both the Democrats and the Socialists, have used the Kosovo unification card in specific moment in time. Sometimes it comes as a necessity because they want to cover other much more pressing issues. So they shift the general public attention on this question because they know that there is an interest, and the fact that the more the years part, the people get together and more closer among the societies in Kosovo and in Albania, not having the official border. I mean, you pass just with an ID card. It allows you to go to visit them, to create friendship and sustainable relationships over time. But on the other hand, I have to admit that Rama said that, yeah, I had access on this non-paper provided by the Prime Minister of Slovenia, but he didn't go forwards elaborating on that. I don't think that that would be the situation, the solution to the general political situation in the region. Kosovo has fought a lot to be where it is today, and it deserves, firstly, to be considered as an independent country with the rights and a seat in the UN, and then afterwards it would be nice, or it would be feasible, said it more correctly, to have a referendum if these two independent countries want to join. Taking these shortcuts to decide that Kosovo joins Albania because we don't manage to find other solutions, it's not fair. It shows incapability of the political leaders in general to find a compromise and diplomatic solutions that are sustainable in the long run. When in the meantime, it might create problems for other countries. It is not acceptable that after many years and many lives lost during the wars in former Yugoslavia, we are still back to the question: should we divide Kosovo, bring a part of the northern part of Mitrovica to Serbia and the other one to Albania, or in the case of Bosnia, divide it into three? It is like going backwards, and it doesn't help sustainability. It doesn't help like living in peace. It creates much more divisions and fights education, because during these 20 or 30 years, a lot has been tried to be achieved, and a lot of investment have been done exactly to educate the younger generations to overcome this non-healthy approaches and not advisable. And when these topics come out, definitely they undermine what all the community, the international community and the locals have achieved. So definitely, I think that it would be even better not to talk at all on this type of terms, and to avoid all these non-healthy ideas coming from different countries, can it be Slovenia or others.
Which is also, thank you very much, but it's also quite interesting, since you already mentioned before that Albania is one of the most pro-European countries, and I think we should talk a little bit, of course, about European Union integration, and especially also, which is actually quite a little bit different, to be integrated in another community, which is to wish, where we also try to overcome nationalism. Of course, it's not happening everywhere. We see also setbacks there. But now in March, finally, Albania was granted with the opening of accession talks, together with North Macedonia. And I'm pretty sure you remember that 2019, we were in Paris shortly before it was blocked by Paris. We tried actually to lobby for it not to happen then, but it did happen. So the question is, and there is also a question in the chat already on this topic, is about what Albania already did. It was quite successful. You mentioned already several of it. But one person, Florence Lemet from the Institute for Foreign Affairs in Budapest, he asked, do you expect that the first intergovernmental conference will still take place under the Portuguese European Union presidency? And then it's also about this conditionality. So what about those issues where Albania has not yet been successful in order to keep on the path towards integration into the European Union?
Starting from the easiest one, I don't think, unfortunately, that under the Portuguese presidency we will have an effective date for the first intergovernmental conference. And it's not because doing homework or achieving the conditions put forward by the EU, but it's more politically oriented. So we have to mention that the last report of the European Commission said that Albania has almost fulfilled all these preconditions set out by Bundestag and other member states, being it advancement of the judicial reform, fight against corruption and organized crime, and then having a functional parliament, proper elections, and so on. So the last shot was exactly having peaceful democratic elections in Albania. And overall, we can say that this has been achieved. Obviously, there will be the reports on that. We cannot say that the elections were perfect or the same level as they are held in Italy, in Germany, and so on. But there is progress in this regard, and this is important. So more or less, all the preconditions have been met, and the date has to be set. But on the other hand, we have to mention that Albania and North Macedonia are running together. Let's put it in a race time. And for as long as also North Macedonia has done its own work, but the veto is from the Bulgarian side, then we cannot expect much. It was only a few days ago, before the 25th of April, that I heard the Prime Minister of Albania say for the first time that we are blocked in this status quo or this situation just because Bulgaria has decided to put the veto against Macedonia. So Macedonia is, let's say, blocking us in a way, said it roughly, because we cannot go forward alone. This was a general narrative or discourse used time ago, where the North Macedonians were saying the same thing, that it's because of Albania and it's then preconditions that we are not managing to go forward. So in this regard, both countries, I mean, they both deserve, but it all depends on the situation, the political situation, and the stepping up of Borisov in Bulgaria, and then technical government, if I'm not wrong. And as soon as they have final elections and a new government, I don't expect much in this regard. It might be that also other stronger member states within EU don't want to invest all their political power on enlargement at this moment, because there are much more pressing issues at the EU level. So let's say that enlargement is not the top priority at this moment, considering also all the other financial problems and crisis, the virus, coronavirus, so on and so forth. But what is important on the EU integration is exactly to understand the import at the domestic level, to understand the importance of going ahead with the reforms and also the alignment of the acquis, despite the progress, it's the progress at the EU level. So, because we always keep saying about the carrot, the missing carrot, and then the lack of reforms. But for as long as this country are democratizing and modernizing their institutions for their own sake, why should be the carrot from the EU side the main focus? We have to think about the politicization of the public administration, about the well management and transparency, accountability of the state budget for our own term. So for as long as we start thinking, changing the mindset and asking for better conditions, we as citizens to our leaders, then it might come a day that we are much more advanced. And the negotiation might go much more faster than they are going in Serbia or in the case of Montenegro. It shouldn't come the push just from outside. It should come also from inside. And here I see the EU and the member states cooperating more with the non-state actors, because in this way we can create this synergy and ask for much more accountability to our leaders and manage to achieve much more than we have been achieving, and use this moment at the moment created exactly to exert pressure and to achieve something, for as long as the carrot is not there. But there is also another thing that for me it's quite sensitive on the side of the EU, because this issue is also too complex. We have this internal fracture and division between the EU institutions that is not healthy at all. Because on the one side, we see the report of the Commission saying that things are going. So they let's say, say good words about the work of the governments that are, I don't mention here just Albania, but also other countries. So they say that everything is going well, you are quite almost achieving things, the reforms, you're fighting corruptions, when we know that the amount of people brought to jail might be even better, the numbers, than those listed in the report. And on the other side, when the decision is shifted from the Commission to the Council, the member states say, sorry, the situation and our reports, country reports, are not saying the same thing that the Commission is saying. So there is a delegitimization of the Commission in that sense. And this division, this decoupling of the two institutions, on the one hand, gives the opportunity to the country leaders, Rama, Vučić, or somebody else, to say, oh, listen, we do have the report, is a written document, we are doing well. And they use it in the public. And on the other side, they say, oh, to justify the position of the member states, they keep on saying, sorry, it's not our fault. The Commission said it. It's because of their national elections and their internal agenda. It's the politicization of the enlargement. There is a dose of truthness in there, but there is also this dose of positivity that the reports of the Commission bring to the discussion, and sometimes are not healthy. And the Commission should, let's say, rethink or re-cooperate in the phase of drafting this kind of reports with the representatives of the member states or the diplomats that are in Brussels, in order to have a much more unified position, because it helps. It helps a lot more the non-state actors, the business community to speak with one voice, the civil society, the academics, the activists, because, well, at the end of the day, we want, as a team, we want the same thing. We want freedom, fundamental freedoms. We want the right to speak up, and media is quite sensitive here. We want a 5-star censorship. We want also to work in our own country. It's having lived both in Albania and different EU member states because of study, but also short-term visits for more working purpose. I feel good in Albania because I'm just starting from the idea that I don't have to do the queue to take the permit de séjour, the permit of stay, and to spend a lot of money and to feel a second-order citizen in that moment, waiting this long queue for days. It brings me up to work to my country, to work and to be motivated to stay there. But on the other side, when you think that the freedom of speech is not at the same level, and you have to self-censor yourself, probably not because you're working in an area that is not public administration, but you have to think about your family. Because if I speak up, a member of my family or relative might be harmed because I'm doing an opposition, and he might or she might lose his working place in the public administration, which is it's quite incorrect and unacceptable. But we have to be fair and to mention also this kind of indirect threats, let's say.
Thank you, Gentiola. I think it was also very interesting. And I would, of course, also like Hannes to comment a little bit on the European Union perspective and how you see what Gentiola just was saying. But before that, there's also just one short question I would also like to take up from Clarissa Pastori, where she asks if you think that a grand coalition between the SP and the DP could be in favor of European Union integration.
Well, firstly, I think that the probability that this happens, it's quite lame, quite impossible. The second, it's not more about creating grand coalitions. It's much more about this, may I say, absurd approach that the political elite in Albania follows to polarize the political climate and to use this verbal way of expressing that fuels up divisions. It is much more their own political narrative than the priorities that their party are following, because the problems are just the same, being left or right. Unemployment is there, EU integration is there, and also education and health situation is there. So the type of intervention is not the major issue. If we are going to be more liberal or more conservatives, the problem is that they are not propense to listen to each other. And in Italian, it's interesting. They have two verbs for listening: sentire and ascoltare. Sentire is when you hear somebody speaking, but you don't concentrate, and ascoltare means when you hear, but you also elaborate on what he's saying. And unfortunately, in Albania happens the first thing, that they talk at the same time, or they talk and don't listen to each other. This is the lack of communication has brought to this polarization and sticking to their own positions without having a kind of breakthrough. And then if we think that we have to resolve even much more problems at the regional level, and we have these politicians that don't listen to each other in a small parliament, then the possibility and perspective to resolve much more important issues, being it regionally or sitting in the European Parliament, it's becoming even more difficult. And doesn't help the EU integration, but doesn't help also the political culture in general, which definitely needs for a strong investment and restructuring in order to start talking to each other and looking each other in the eyes without an intermediate communicator or this clashing messages that don't help to have a healthy democracy.
Hannes, please.
Very, very briefly to the last point, I agree fully. I think it's not about a coalition, it's about a normal understanding and maybe an agreement on some vital issues which are important. I still remember this night when we were sitting in a restaurant in Strasbourg, and on the one hand was Rama, opposition, on the other hand Salih Berisha, and we tried to make some basic agreement between the two concerning the next steps, but at the end it was not possible. And it should be more possible nowadays because this is something of democracy. It's not something about, the one is number one, the other is perhaps the next number one, but now it's number two, but they have to agree on some basic issues in a compromise. Concerning Europe, I mean, Jula is correct. On the other hand, as former member of parliament, I may add that the European Parliament is very positive also for the starting of the real negotiations. And I think it is fatal and unacceptable what Bulgaria does now after Greece and the agreement and the important steps that the North Macedonian government did take. On the other hand, again, it's up to the countries to do the reforms. And of course, there is some leaders in the EU are afraid if, for example, they criticize too much Vucic's policy towards the media and towards the opposition, that he sees no interest in the European Union and goes more into the direction of less of Turkey, but of Russia and China. On the other hand, the real alternative is not lying there because they can offer some vaccines and other issues, but the modernization of the country, the reforms, will not come from there if people are interested in reform. Of course, if you are not interested in reform, but more in corruption and having your network, then of course it's different. Now, towards the end, I think from my side, Rama has a big possibility now to be a real strong leader, to go into the history of the Balkans in doing the reforms, continuing the reforms, trying to be an anchor of stability, because he is now, has been elected again. He does not need to go into small infighting, neither with the opposition nor with Albin Kurti, but he can go forward and modernize the Albania, because there's still a lot to do. There's still difference between, you mentioned those of the south and the north. Big things have been done. If you look, I know when I was in Tirana the first time, it was 1 or 2 years after the breakdown or the revolution, so to say, into democracy. It's totally different today. Maybe something is overdone. Some of the buildings are too many and have not been occupied. But he has the power to modernize, also his successor as mayor of Tirana. But sometimes he is inclined to do the small, small things also on this kind of networks inside to keep him in power. He will be in power for a long time if he really does the basic reforms of the country. This is a big chance. This could be an example for the whole Balkan, for other countries as well, for Kosovo, for Serbia, so for Bosnia-Herzegovina. So he could be the strongest man in the Balkans if he does his job properly. The potentiality is here. If he uses it, it's up to him.
Thank you. Since we're already actually running out of time, we're already over time, I still would like to just post the last question in the Q&A section, where someone just asked, maybe you just can very briefly say, how would you rate the government strategy with regards to coronavirus, like the economic measures? You have been saying that this is really a big, huge problem, getting Chinese vaccines from Turkey, but also negotiating with the Pfizer vaccines. Maybe very shortly. So,
well, I have to mention that I'm not an expert on the coronavirus management in general, but also in economics. my profession is doing research in political science and mostly related to freedom of speech and media. But what I would say that the government had enough opportunity and possibility to know the situation on real time, because they were in power since already in March last year, so they know how the curve of the virus spread out in the country. They preferred not to elaborate a proper program during the election, so they opted much more, their platform was much more talking about the opposition and how the opposition is not good, so they avoid talk about issue. I hope that from now until September, they will take the issue much more seriously and start working properly in a program that is also measurable, because we have to mention that so far they do the programs, but there are no reports with clear indication on what they're doing. So I would really wish and hope that much more science is put into the policymaking process, and after 2 mandates, the third one should be also important and devote also this specific attention to research and to academia in general, in order to leave something written and to demonstrate what the government has been doing, and also opening up to other stakeholders, because we have to mention that the enlargement process, the membership into the EU, but also any kind of policy making in a democratic form of government, like stimulates and asks for the participation of different stakeholders. And here, this is the first time in 30 years that a government in Albania has the opportunity and the power and the potential, as Hannah said, to manage to bring forward new initiatives or to take up on those that were initiated but left a bit behind in the past years. I would really wish and lobby, if I could, to put much more focus on education, because for me it's quite sensitive. We are losing a lot of bright minds. They take scholarship and they never come back. And this is much more sensitive than daily politics or events that can be concluded or forgotten after some years. This is important.
Thank you so much, GENTIOLA. Hannes, would you like to add something?
Only 2 sentences. One, I can agree on education. I visited some of the private universities who were not really universities, I would say. So I think the criteria should be stricter, but it's not only university, it's general education. And the second element, because on the question is health, and here the European Union should help more. We have all our deficiencies. I'm glad now, as an Austrian, sometimes one can be proud that we now distribute vaccines on behalf of the European Union in some of the countries. Rather late, but anyway, we do something. But I think we all need to concentrate also on education, but also the social and the health system, because pandemics will not disappear, and the people will be very disappointed if the European Union is not helping these countries to establish a health system with accession, of course, for ordinary citizens who should not have to spend a lot of money, but have an equal access to the basic medical services, including, of course, vaccination.
So I think, unfortunately, we already have to close, but let me first thank you so much, GENTIOLA. It was very interesting. We touched upon very many topics. I mean, of course, we couldn't touch them all. I mean, we didn't really talk about civil society and about the protests, and there would be so many topics we could discuss maybe longer. There's also a comment in the chat about the positive foreign policy Edi Rama was also managing and was able to do, and so there would be still a lot to talk, but I think you did really, it was very interesting for me. I learned a lot, and thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you soon in person. And we will keep looking on the region, on Albania, on Kosovo, but also on the other Western Balkan countries, see what we can do as IIP. We will keep the group together, the Young Generation for the New Western Balkans, which is a project. You can find it on our website, iipvienna.com, where we get many young experts like GENTIOLA who engage in discussions, and where it is no problem at all to discuss the different issues, which might be more difficult on a political level. So thank you so much, GENTIOLA. Please stay safe, and I really hope to see you soon in person. And same to you, Hannes. Have a nice early evening and enjoy. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie.